Come to the floor to talk about, it's my understanding we're not going to be allowed to offer amendments again on a significant bill that spends billions, tens of billions of dollars, to talk about a couple of amendments that I have. My staff recently talked with some veterans from Oklahoma, and I want to give you an anecdote that just happened. This is about VA care. This is a lady, 100% disabled, veteran, who has had knee replacement at a VA hospital. She didn't have one knee replacement. She had 2 knee replacements. And then she had 2 knee replacements on the other knee. So if you look at the statistics on a knee replacement have to be replaced, it's a very rare occurrence. But the fact that you'd have 2 knee replacements and both of them have to be replaced, it's unheard of. And the story doesn't end there. The story ends with the fact that during her 2nd knee replacement, they broke her femur. So they had to put a rod in to rod her femur. And when they put the implant in, she ended up with one leg an inch longer than the other leg. Now, the fact is that this all occurred at a VA hospital, and it's unheard of that somebody who has a knee replacement on one side would have to have another one done because of a complication, and then have the other knee done and have to have that knee redone because of a complication. But then on top of it, the skill of the surgeon in terms of doing a 2nd replacement, having the rod, and then putting the wrong rod in, creating a leg length discrepancy that can only be corrected now by her spending a significant amount of money on an orthotic shoe on the short leg. Which, if you know anything about medicine, what that does is change the alignment of the spine, which causes tremendous arthritis in the spine of that patient. So here's a patient, if you look across the world in the private sector, 99.9% of the time would not have had to have either of them replaced, wouldn't have had to have a rod put in her femur, and wouldn't have a leg length discrepancy. And I agree that that's an anecdote. But those are the kind of things that we're not holding the VA to account for. So one of the amendments that I was going to offer to this bill was a very straightforward amendment requiring every 6 months that the VA publish in both their hospitals, outpatient, and nursing homes the quality of their care, the mortality rates, the complication rates, the infection rates, the wait time in the emergency rooms, the wait times for an employment, for a screening exam, the wait time for an endoscopy, the complications associated with those, so that veterans could actually see and compare to the private sector, where every other hospital knows all this stuff and publishes it, so they can see and compare the quality of care. Because we have an honor-bound commitment to offer care to those that have offered to sacrifice their life and their future for our freedom. But we're not going to be able to offer the first step in terms of accountability to the VA health system because we get to offer no amendments. What if you knew, and this does not apply, and I don't mean to denigrate the whole VA system because there are some great VA hospitals, but in your area where you have to go, if you knew the quality was 20 or 25% less than what you could get in your own hometown, would you still go to a VA hospital? Should veterans not know whether or not they're getting a standard of care that equates with what they could get in the private sector? They're not going to know because that's nowhere in terms of the accountability of the VA system that I talked about yesterday. The other amendment one of the other amendments that I was going to offer would be to strike Section 301. And the chairman of the committee yesterday referenced 302. He was actually talking about Section 308 of his bill, not Section 302 of his bill. But when you expand VA health care to priority group 8, these are people who don't meet the income, have no disability, no service-connected disability, and have no limited resources, to put them into the VA healthcare system when we're not adequately treating the veterans who are eligible for service today in the VA healthcare system, what you're really doing is taking away our commitment to care for those that we've already promised care to. So it's somewhat cynical that we would expand from 6 million to a potential of 22 million people into a system that is behind the curve already. The other thing that's important for that is that the care for these non-service connected veterans was excluded from the VA's priority group so that VA could focus its limited resources on our veterans with service-connected disabilities. In other words, they have a health complication because they served our country. And as former Secretary Anthony Principe said, remember, when everyone is priority, no one is. And that's exactly what this bill will do. It'll take the priority away from our service-connected veterans to where they will fall further through the cracks. The other thing in this section is the only thing worse than them being in the Affordable Care Act, which is what this really specifically is designed, is to take them out of the exchanges and put them into the VA. So what we're really saying under this bill, if you're a high-income, non-disabled veteran, the only health care coverage you have available to you is an Obamacare exchange, then you now qualify for VA services. Well, what is that about? What that is about is moving to a single-payer, government-run, totally government-run healthcare system. And this is about moving 16 million veterans, or the potential of up to 16 million veterans, to that position. So the only thing worse than being covered by the VA, where veterans are waiting for weeks to see a doctor and literally dying because of medical deficiencies, is being in an Affordable Care Act exchange. This amendment would strike the expansion from the legislation, which would ensure that the VA remains focused on service-connected, disabled, and increasing the quality of care for more than 6 million veterans currently in the VA system. And I want to talk a minute about why we did that. We created the VA healthcare system for those that have a complication of their service. A complication of their service. Do we have a commitment? One, to ensure that those that have a complication from their service get the care that we have promised them. I believe we do. Section 301 would markedly minimize that commitment to those that have a complication from their service. So how is it that we come about that we have this great big VA bill on the floor without any oversight, aggressive oversight on holding the VA accountable to do what it's supposed to be doing now, with a 59% increase in budget since October 1st of 2009, and expand it and blow it to an area where we're going to offer these same services where we're not meeting quality outcomes, we're not meeting timeliness outcomes, we're not meeting care outcomes, and we're going to put that on the VA system. I would say the better way to honor our veterans who have a complication associated with their service is to hold the VA accountable through transparency of their quality. Here's the other thing that hadn't been studied, and we don't know the answer to this. I certainly don't know it. I can't find it anywhere. Is what does it cost to do an X procedure in a VA hospital, totally absorbed, versus doing it in a non-VA hospital? Would the American taxpayer be better? Let's assume quality is the same. Would the American taxpayer be better off if, in fact, we delivered that service at a cost that's much less? But nobody's asked for those numbers. The VA can't give those numbers. The VA doesn't know those numbers. And so we're driving blind. We don't know what it costs to do a total knee in a VA hospital. We do know what it costs in Oklahoma City from every hospital. Matter of fact, there's a wonderful hospital in Oklahoma City that advertises every price, all their complications, everything else out there. They have people from all across the country coming because they're so much cheaper and so much better than what people in the private market can get done where they live. Let's see how VA cost and quality and outcomes compare to that. Because if you really want to drive quality for our veterans, we got to have accountability in terms of how we spend the money, accountability in terms of the outcomes, accountability in terms of quality, and accountability in terms of the service. The other amendment that I have would allow service-connected veterans who are driving hundreds of miles in my state to get care, a pilot program which would allow them to go anywhere they wanted, to their hometown, to the next town over, if it's bigger and has higher quality, rather than drive 200 miles to get their care at a VA hospital. And we would cover it under Medicare rates. Since we don't know the cost ramifications of what we do at VA clinics and VA hospitals in terms of the total absorbed cost, but we do know what the price would be if we had Medicare rates, my learned opinion is that number one is veterans would have access to care closer to home, probably improved quality, and most probably a decreased cost for the federal government, i.e. the American taxpayers, in terms of meeting this honor-bound commitment to our veterans. If, in fact, you served this country, and one of the benefits of serving this country, and you have a service-connected disability associated with that, is a promise of quality health care, why do we say you can only get it in a VA clinic or a VA hospital? Why can't you get, if you served our country, why can't you get it wherever you want? I mean, you served our country to preserve our freedom of choice, our freedom to do and select what's best for us and our interest. Why can't a veteran have that privilege that he fought for or she fought for and put their rear ends on the line for? Why do we not avail them of the freedom that they sacrificed for? Nobody will answer that question. Nobody will come down and answer that question. Those are knowable answers. They're moral questions. If you sacrifice, should you not have the benefits of the freedom for which you sacrificed? The other problem with this bill is it has a false pay for. Money that we might have spent on a war in Afghanistan, because we're not going to spend it, we're going to spend it here and call that a pay for. It's not a pay for. It doesn't pass muster. It doesn't pass the budget point of order even on it. And everybody knows that. So what we ought to be doing, instead of having this bill on the floor, we ought to have a bill on the floor that holds the VA accountable, that creates transparency in the VA so that everybody in the country, including the veterans, can see outcomes, quality, and costs. And finally, we ought to give the veterans the freedom that they fought for. That if they're deserving of this benefit, they ought to be able to get the benefit anywhere they choose, because they're the ones that preserve the rights and the abilities and the capabilities for us to experience the freedom to make choices for ourselves. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor and notice the absence of a quorum.